Captain Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the UES Determination and watched the stars bend around them as they dropped out of faster-than-light travel. 3 years ago, she never would have believed this was possible. 3 years ago, humans thought they were alone in the universe. The ship shuddered slightly as the engines powered down. Through the main view screen, she could see Kepler 442 be hanging in space like a blue and green jewel. It was a beautiful world, with 2 small moons and rings of ice that caught the light from its yellow sun. This planet had been chosen as neutral ground for the diplomatic meeting because no single species claimed it. "We have arrived at the Kepler system, Captain," reported Lieutenant Martinez from the navigation station. "All systems are running normally. The other ships are already here." Sarah nodded and looked at the tactical display. 4 other vessels waited in orbit around the planet. She recognized each one from the files she had studied. The Vorthak ship looked like a giant crystal formation that somehow flew through space. The Cylani vessel appeared to be grown rather than built, with smooth curves that reminded her of tree branches. The Nexari ship was sleek and blue, designed to move through water as easily as through the vacuum of space. The 4th ship made her stomach tighten with worry. The Zephyrian vessel was massive, easily 3 times the size of her own ship. Its hull was covered in sharp angles and weapon ports. It looked like it had been built for war, not diplomacy. "Captain," came a voice from behind her. She turned to see Ambassador David Park walking onto the bridge. He was a small man with gray hair and kind eyes, but Sarah knew he was one of Earth's best diplomats. "Are you ready for this?" "As ready as we can be," Sarah replied. "The question is whether they are ready to listen." 3 years ago, first contact had been a shock to everyone on Earth. The Galactic Council had been watching human space travel for decades, waiting to see if humanity would develop faster-than-light technology on their own. When Earth finally achieved it, a council ship had appeared in orbit around Earth and delivered a simple message: "Welcome to the galaxy." "We need to talk." The talks had been going on ever since. The Galactic Council was made up of 12 different alien species, and they had been keeping peace in the galaxy for thousands of years. Humans were still considered newcomers, babies, learning to walk among giants. Earth had been given provisional membership, which meant they could attend meetings but could not vote on important decisions. Sarah had been chosen to command the Determination because of her military record and her ability to stay calm under pressure. But this mission was about more than just keeping calm. The future of humanity's place in the galaxy might depend on what happened in the next few days. "Captain, we are receiving a communication from the planet," reported Communications Officer Kim. "They are ready to begin the formal greetings." "Put it on screen," Sarah ordered. The view screen changed to show a conference room on the planet's surface. 3 aliens sat at a curved table, and Sarah felt a moment of relief when she saw them. These were Earth's allies, the species that had spoken up for humanity in council meetings. The first was Kethara, a Vorthak who looked like a walking cluster of blue crystals. The crystals caught the light and threw rainbow patterns across the walls. When Kethara spoke, the voice came from somewhere inside the crystal formation and sounded like wind chimes. "Greetings, humans of Earth," Kethara said. "We welcome you to this gathering. We hope today will bring understanding between all our peoples." Next to the Vorthak sat Bloomin' Starlight, a Cylani who looked like a cross between a tree and a person. The Cylani's skin was green and bark-like, with small flowers growing from their shoulders and arms. When they spoke, their voice sounded like rustling leaves. "The Cylani people are honored by human friendship," Bloomin' Starlight said. "Your species shows great promise. We believe you will add much wisdom to the council." The third alien was Deep Current Flowing, a Nexari who wore a special suit filled with water to keep their gills working in the air. Through the clear helmet, Sarah could see their fish-like face and large, intelligent eyes. The Nexari had been the first species to suggest that humans should be given full membership in the council. "The currents of fortune flow well today," Deep Current Flowing said in their bubbling voice. "May our words bring peace and our thoughts bring unity." Sarah smiled and activated the communication system. "Thank you all for your warm welcome." Ambassador Park and I are honored to represent Earth at this gathering. We hope this meeting will strengthen the bonds between our peoples. But even as she spoke the diplomatic words, Sarah could not forget what was really happening. These three species had risked their own standing in the Council by supporting humanity. They had argued that Earth should be given full membership rights, including the ability to vote on Council decisions. This had made them enemies among the more powerful Council members. The leader of those enemies was Counselor Vexstar of the Zephyrians. Sarah had only met the alien once before, but that meeting had left her deeply troubled. Vexstar stood nearly 8 feet tall, with gray skin and eyes like black stones. The Zephyrian had made it clear that he considered humans to be dangerous, primitives who should never be trusted with real power. "Captain," Lieutenant Martinez called out, "another ship is approaching the planet." "It's a Zephyrian vessel." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Put it on the tactical display." The new ship was even larger than the one already in orbit. Its hull was covered with weapon systems, and it moved through space like a predator hunting prey. Sarah had read the reports about Zephyrian military technology. Their ships could destroy entire planets if they chose to do so. "They are hailing us," reported Officer Kim. "On screen," Sarah said. The display changed to show the bridge of the Zephyrian ship. Counselor Vexstar stood in the center of the room, surrounded by other Zephyrians in military uniforms. The alien's black eyes seemed to look directly at Sarah through the screen. "Human vessel," Vexstar said in a voice like grinding stone. "You will maintain position and make no aggressive movements. This system is now under Zephyrian protection during the diplomatic talks." Sarah felt her hands clench into fists, but she kept her voice steady. "Understood, Counselor. We are here for peaceful talks only." Vexstar's lipless mouth curved into what might have been a smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Yes, peaceful talks. How fortunate for everyone involved that we are all civilized beings who understand the value of peace." The communication ended, leaving Sarah staring at a blank screen. She did not like the way Vexstar had said those words. There had been a threat hidden in them, a warning that only someone trained in military tactics would recognize. "Captain," Ambassador Park said quietly, "we should head down to the planet. The formal session begins in 2 hours." Sarah nodded, but she could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. The Zephyrians had brought far more firepower than was needed for a simple diplomatic meeting. Either they were trying to intimidate the other species, or they were preparing for something much worse than failed negotiations. 2 hours later, Sarah sat in the conference room on the planet's surface and watched as the 5 species gathered around a circular table. The room had been designed to accommodate all of their different needs. The lighting could be adjusted for species with different vision. The atmosphere was carefully controlled to allow everyone to breathe comfortably. Translation devices ensured that everyone could understand each other perfectly, but despite all the careful preparations, Sarah could feel the tension in the room like electricity before a storm. Ambassador Park sat next to her, reviewing his notes one final time. Across the table, the 3 allied species waited patiently for the meeting to begin. Cathara's crystals pulsed with a soft blue light. Bloom in Starlight's flowers had closed, which Sarah had learned was a sign of stress among the Cylani. Deep current flowings. Soup bubbled quietly as they breathed through their gills. Then Counselor Vexstar entered the room, and the temperature seemed to drop. The Zephyrian was followed by 2 other members of his species, both wearing the black uniforms of the Council's military forces. They took their seats across from the humans without a word. "Let us begin," Vexstar said. "This gathering was requested by the 3 species who have chosen to support the human application for full Council membership. They claim that humanity deserves the same rights and responsibilities as the founding members of our great civilization." The way he said "great civilization" made it clear that Vexstar did not believe humans were part of it. Cathara's crystals chimed softly as the Vorthak spoke. "We have observed human behavior for 3 years. They show curiosity about the universe, respect for other forms of life, and a desire to learn from more advanced species. These are the qualities that make a species ready for full membership. Humans adapt quickly to new situations, added Bloom in Starlight. They have learned our languages, studied our cultures, and worked to understand our different ways of thinking. This flexibility will make them valuable partners in council decisions. This is what humans do, Vexstar continued. They fight. They destroy. They consume everything around them until nothing is left. In just 3 years since first contact, they have already begun to spread their influence beyond their home system. How long before they decide that the Council's careful balance of power no longer serves their interests? Sarah felt her face burning with anger, but Ambassador Park placed a gentle hand on her arm to keep her from speaking. Counselor Vexstar, Park said calmly, every species has a violent past. The question is not where we came from, but where we are going. Humanity has learned from its mistakes. Vexstar asked, black eyes fixed on the human ambassador. Have you? Your own military records show that you consider the Council's fleets to be a potential threat. You have been studying our ship designs and weapon systems. You have been training your forces for space combat. These are not the actions of a peaceful species seeking friendship. Sarah could not stay silent any longer. We study your technology because we need to understand how to defend ourselves. And recent events have shown that we were right to be concerned. The room went completely quiet. Even the bubbling from deep current flowing suit seemed to stop. Vexstar turned his attention to Sarah as she felt like a small animal being studied by a predator. Captain Chun, isn't it? Yes, I have read your file. A military officer with an impressive record of violence and destruction. How interesting that Earth would send a warrior to a peace conference. I am here to protect Ambassador Park and to represent Earth's interests, Sarah said firmly. Nothing more. And what are Earth's interests, Captain? Vexstar asked. To take your place among equals? Or to eventually challenge the species that have maintained galactic peace for thousands of years? Before Sarah could answer, Catharas, crystals chimed urgently. Counselor Vexstar, these accusations are unfair. All species study military technology. The humans have shown no hostile intentions toward any council member. Have they not? Vexstar asked. He touched a control on his chair, and the holographic display changed. Now it showed intelligence reports, communications intercepts, and analysis of human space activities. These documents show that humanity has been making secret contact with non-council species. They have been offering technology and military support to groups that the Council has specifically forbidden them to contact. Sarah's blood ran cold. Some of those reports were accurate. Earth had been making contact with other species, but only to offer humanitarian aid to groups that the Council had been ignoring. Ambassador Park stood up again. Those contacts were made to provide medical supplies and disaster relief to species in need. We informed the Council of all our activities. You informed us after the fact, Vexstar replied, and you ignored our warnings about interfering with Council policy. You have shown that humanity cannot be trusted to follow the rules that keep our galaxy stable. The Zephyrian leaned forward and his voice became deadly quiet. I will be direct, since humans seem to prefer plain speaking. The 3 species who support you have a choice to make. They can withdraw their support for human membership and accept that humanity will remain a junior species under Council guidance. Or they can continue to support your dangerous ambitions and face the consequences. Deep current flowing suit bubbled rapidly as the Nexari became agitated. Are you threatening us, Vexstar? I am explaining reality, the Zephyrian replied. The Council has maintained peace for millennia by ensuring that dangerous species are kept under control. Humanity is dangerous. Any species that supports them is helping to destabilize the galaxy. Such actions cannot be tolerated. Bloom and Starlight's flowers opened and closed rapidly, which Sarah had learned was a sign of extreme stress. The Silani. People will not abandon our friends because of threats. Nor will the Vorthek, added Cathara, crystals pulsing with determination. And the Nexari stand with our allies, Deep Current Flowing declared. Vexstar nodded slowly as if he had expected this response. Very well, you have made your choice. The Council will remember who chose to support chaos over order, destruction over peace, primitives over civilization. He stood up and gestured to his two companions. This meeting is over. The formal session will be held tomorrow, where the full Council will vote on humanity's application. I suggest you all use the time to reconsider your positions. As the Zephyrians left the room, Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. That had not been a diplomatic negotiation. It had been an ultimatum delivered, with barely concealed threats. Well, Ambassador Park said quietly, that could have gone better. Cathara-S crystals made a sound like breaking glass. Something is wrong. Vexstar was too confident, too certain. The Zephyrians are planning something beyond a simple vote. Sarah thought about the warships in orbit and the way Vexstar had looked at their allies. We need to be very careful, all of us. But as she spoke the words, Sarah realized that being careful might not be enough. The Zephyrians had made their position clear. They would not accept humanity as equals, and they would not tolerate anyone who disagreed with them. The only question now was how far they were willing to go to enforce their will. 2 weeks had passed since the failed diplomatic meeting on Kepler 442b. Captain Sarah Chun sat in her quarters aboard the UES Determination, reading through the daily reports from Earth. The news was not good. The Galactic Council had voted on humanity's application for full membership. The result had been exactly what she expected. 7 species voted against, 3 voted in favor, and 2 abstained. Humanity would remain a junior member with no real voice in galactic affairs, but that was not the worst part. The worst part was what happened to Earth's allies after the vote. The Vorthak had lost their mining rights in the Rigel system. The Cylani had been forced to pay massive fines for trade violations that had never existed before. The Nexari had been banned from using several important shipping routes. It was clear that Councillor Vexstar was making good on his threat. Any species that supported humanity would face consequences. Sarah was about to close the report when her door chimed. "Come in," she called. Lieutenant Martinez entered, looking worried. "Captain, we just received a priority message from Fleet Command. They want us to change course immediately." Sarah stood up and followed Martinez to the bridge. The crew was already at their stations, preparing for a course change. "What's our new destination?" she asked. "Kepler Station," Martinez replied. "It's a research facility operated jointly by the Vorthak, Cylani, and Nexari. They sent out a distress signal 2 hours ago, then went silent." Sarah felt ice form in her stomach. Kepler Station was home to over 15,000 civilians. Scientists, their families, cultural exchange students, and support staff from all 3 of Earth's allied species. It was supposed to be a symbol of cooperation between the different races. "How long to get there?" she asked. 18 hours at maximum speed," reported the navigation officer. "Do it," Sarah ordered, "and send a message to Fleet Command. Tell them we're on our way." The next 18 hours were the longest of Sarah's life. She tried to sleep but could not stop thinking about what they might find at Kepler Station. She tried to eat but could not keep food down. She spent most of the time on the bridge, watching the stars stream past as they traveled through faster-than-light space. When they finally dropped out of hyperspace at the Kepler system, Sarah knew immediately that something terrible had happened. The space around where Kepler Station should have been was filled with debris. Pieces of metal and plastic floated in the vacuum, along with things that Sarah did not want to think about too closely. "Scanning for survivors," reported the science officer. "I'm picking up several small life signs. They appear to be coming from escape pods." "Get us to them immediately," Sarah ordered. "Launch all rescue shuttles." The next few hours were a nightmare of rescue operations. Sarah watched as her crew pulled survivors from damaged escape pods and emergency shelters. Many of the pods had been damaged, their occupants already dead. Others had run out of air or power waiting for rescue. In the end, they saved less than 300 people out of 15,000. Sarah met the survivors in the ship's main cargo bay, which had been converted into a temporary medical facility. Most of them were injured, all of them were in shock. She recognized several faces from the diplomatic meetings, scientists and researchers who had been working on joint projects with human teams. One survivor stood out from the rest, Dr. Kethara, the Vorthax scientist who had spoken in favor of humanity at the diplomatic conference. The crystal being's normally blue glow had faded to a dull gray, and several of their crystal formations were cracked and broken. Dr. Kethara, Sarah said softly, can you tell me what happened? The Vorthax crystals chimed weakly. Captain Chun, I am glad to see you, though I wish the circumstances were different. The alien paused as if gathering strength. We must show you what happened. The galaxy must know the truth. Kethara raised one crystalline arm and a small crystal formation detached from their body. This is a memory crystal. It contains my experiences from the attack. You must see it to understand. Sarah took the crystal carefully. It was warm to the touch and pulsed with a faint inner light. How do I access the memories? Touch it to your forehead, Kethara explained. The crystal will share what I experienced. But be warned, Captain. What you will see is not easy to witness. Sarah nodded and pressed the crystal to her forehead. The world around her disappeared, replaced by Kethara's memories. She was standing in a laboratory aboard Kepler station. Around her, scientists from 3 different species worked together on various projects. The mood was cheerful, with the excited energy that came from making new discoveries. Through the lab's windows she could see the beautiful purple and gold clouds of the Kepler nebula. Then alarms began to sound. Kethara moved to a communication panel, where a panicked voice was reporting multiple ships approaching the station. Sarah could feel the Vorthax confusion and growing fear as more reports came in. The approaching ships were broadcasting Council identification codes, but they were not responding to communication attempts. The view shifted as Kethara moved to an observation deck. Through the transparent aluminum windows, Sarah could see them. 12 massive warships, their hulls painted in the gray and black colors of the Zephyrian fleet. They were moving into attack formation around the station. This must be a mistake, someone was saying. We are a civilian research facility. We are protected under Council law. But there was no mistake. The lead ship opened fire without warning. Sarah watched in horror as the station's defensive shields flared and failed under the massive bombardment. Sections of the station began to explode, venting atmosphere and debris into space. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut, cutting off entire sections where people were still trapped. The memory shifted again. Now, Kethara was in an escape pod with a dozen other survivors watching through a small porthole as the Zephyrian ships continued their attack. But they were not just destroying the station. They were hunting. Sarah saw Zephyrian fighters chasing down escape pods, shooting them like clay targets at a shooting range. She watched families torn apart as their emergency shelters were destroyed by precise weapons fire. She heard the screams and pleas for mercy that went unanswered. One Zephyrian ship moved close enough to the escape pod that Sarah could see into its bridge through the memory. The aliens inside were calm, professional, going about their work of mass murder, as if it were a routine training exercise. Then she heard a voice broadcasting on all frequencies. It was Counselor Vexstar. Let this be a lesson to all who would support the human contamination, the Zephyrian's voice said coldly. This station was a breeding ground for dangerous ideas, a place where primitive human thinking infected civilized minds. We have cleansed it as we will cleanse any place that harbors such corruption. The galaxy is safer today. The memory ended, and Sarah found herself back in the cargo bay of her ship, staring at the crystal in her hand. She felt sick, angry, and terrified all at the same time. They murdered everyone, she whispered. 15,000 civilians, including children. They murdered them all? Kethara's crystals pulsed weakly. Not everyone. They let some of us live so we could spread their message. They want the galaxy to know what happens to those who oppose them. Sarah looked around the cargo bay at the other survivors. A Cylani child who had lost both parents. A Nexari family whose oldest son had been killed trying to protect the younger ones. An elderly Vorthek whose life's work had been destroyed along with the station. "We need to get this information to Earth immediately," Sarah said. "The Council needs to see what their peacekeepers have done." But even as she spoke the words, Sarah knew it would not matter. The Council was controlled by species like the Zephyrians. They would find a way to justify the massacre, just as Vexstar had already begun to do. Dr. Cathara seemed to read her thoughts. "Captain, there is something else you must know. The attack on Kepler station was not random. We had intercepted communications suggesting that other attacks were being planned." "What kind of attacks?" Sarah asked. "Refugee settlements. Colonies where survivors from previous Council pacification operations have been relocated. Zephyrians call it Operation Clean Slate. They plan to eliminate all evidence of their past crimes by destroying anyone who might testify against them." Sarah felt her hands clench into fists. "How many colonies are we talking about?" "Dozens," Cathara replied. "Perhaps hundreds. Every world where the Council has relocated species they have defeated or displaced. They plan to kill them all and claim it was necessary for galactic security." One of Sarah's officers approached, holding a datapad. "Captain, we've received new orders from Fleet Command. We're to transport the survivors to Earth immediately and deliver a full report to the United Earth Assembly." Sarah nodded, but her mind was already racing ahead. It would take 3 days to reach Earth. How many more colonies would be destroyed in that time? How many more innocent people would die while humanity debated what to do? "Dr. Cathara," she said quietly, "do you have a list of the colonies that are in immediate danger?" The vortex crystals chimed sadly. "Yes, the first target will likely be New Ceylani. It is the largest refugee settlement, with over 200 million inhabitants. Most of them are Ceylani who were displaced when their homeworld was strip-mined by Council corporations. 200 million people." Sarah could barely comprehend a number that large. It was more than the entire population of Earth's Mars colonies. "How long do they have?" she asked. "Based on the communications we intercepted, perhaps a week." "Maybe less." Sarah closed her eyes and tried to think. The Determination was just one ship, barely large enough to carry the 300 survivors they had already rescued. Even if they could reach New Ceylani in time, what could they do against a Zephyrian battle fleet? But they had to try. Someone had to try. She activated her communication system and opened a channel to Earth. "This is Captain Chen of the UES. Determination. Priority message for President Vasquez and the United Earth Assembly. We have evidence of war crimes committed by the Galactic Council. 15,000 civilians have been murdered at Kepler Station and more attacks are planned. Request immediate instructions." While they waited for a response from Earth, Sarah gathered her senior officers in the conference room. She showed them the memory crystal and explained what Dr. Cathara had told her about Operation Clean Slate. "What are our options?" she asked. Commander Williams, her second-in-command, studied the tactical displays. "Militarily, we have no options. A single frigate against a Zephyrian battle fleet would be suicide." "Then we find another way," Sarah said firmly. "We warn as many colonies as we can. We document everything we see. We make sure the galaxy knows what the Council is really doing." Lieutenant Martinez looked up from his datapad. "Captain, I've been analyzing the survivors' testimonies. The Zephyrians were very careful to destroy all communications equipment on Kepler Station before they attacked. They didn't want anyone to send out a warning." "What's your point?" Sarah asked. "They're going to do the same thing at the other colonies. Cut off communications, then attack. The victims won't be able to call for help, and the rest of the galaxy won't know what happened until it's too late." Sarah felt a cold realization settle over her. Unless someone is already there to witness it. The room fell silent as everyone understood what she was suggesting. "Captain," Commander Williams said carefully, "you're not seriously considering flying into a war zone just to record a massacre." "I'm considering doing whatever is necessary to save lives and expose the truth," Sarah replied. "These people trusted humanity. They stood up for us when no one else would. Now they're being murdered because of that support. We can't abandon them. Before anyone could respond, the communication system activated. President Vasquez's voice filled the room, transmitted across the vast distance between stars. Captain Chun, this is President Vasquez. We have received your report and reviewed the evidence. The United Earth Assembly is meeting in emergency session to determine our response. In the meantime, you are ordered to return to Earth immediately with all survivors. Sarah stared at the communication panel. Return to Earth while 200 million people faced extinction. With respect, Madam President, Sarah said slowly, I request permission to divert to New Ceylani first. If the Zephyrians are planning to attack that colony, someone needs to be there to document it. There was a long pause before the President responded. Captain, I understand your feelings, but one ship cannot make a difference against a battle fleet. Your priority is to get those survivors to safety. And what about the survivors on New Ceylani? Sarah asked. Don't they deserve the same protection? Another pause. When President Vasquez spoke again, her voice was heavy with resignation. Captain, we are not at war with the Galactic Council. We cannot risk starting one by interfering with their internal operations. Sarah felt something break inside her chest. Internal operations. That was what they were calling genocide now. Understood, Madam President, she said finally. We will return to Earth as ordered. But as the communication ended, Sarah looked around the table at her officers. She could see the same anger and frustration in their eyes that she felt in her own heart. Captain, Commander Williams said quietly, the crew won't like this order. No, Sarah agreed. They won't, but we are military officers. We follow orders even when we don't like them. Dr. Cathara's voice came from the doorway. The Vorthak had been listening to the conversation. Captain, may I ask you something? Sarah nodded. If your leaders had ordered you to ignore the distress signal from Kepler station, would you have obeyed? Sarah thought about the question for a long moment. No, she said finally. I would not have. Then why is this different? The Vorthak asked. 200 million people are about to die. Your leaders say you cannot help them, but your leaders are not here. You are? Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the debris field that had once been home to 15,000 people. In the distance, she could see the lights of her rescue shuttles still searching for survivors. Because, she said quietly, those people trusted us. They believed in us. And we're about to let them down just like everyone else has. She turned back to her officers. Prepare the ship for departure. We're going home to Earth, just as ordered. But as her officers filed out of the conference room, Sarah remained behind, staring at the memory crystal that Dr. Cathara had given her. Inside that crystal was the truth about what the Galactic Council was really willing to do to maintain their power. The question was, what was humanity willing to do to stop them? Captain Sarah Chun stood in the main briefing room of Earth's orbital command station, watching as the most powerful people in human space reviewed the evidence from Kepler station. The room was packed with military leaders, government officials, and representatives from every major human colony. But the silence was so complete that Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. On the main display screen, the memory crystal from Dr. Cathara played its terrible story for the third time. Sarah had already watched it dozens of times during the journey back to Earth, but it never got easier. The systematic destruction of 15,000 innocent lives. The cold efficiency of the Zephyrian attack. The voice of Counselor Vextar explaining why mass murder was necessary for galactic peace. President Elena Vasquez sat at the head of the conference table, her face gray with exhaustion. She had not slept since receiving Sarah's first report. 3 days ago, none of them had slept much. Turn it off, the president said quietly when the recording reached its end. The display went dark, but the images seemed to hang in the air like ghosts. Admiral Marcus Torres, commander of Earth's combined fleet, was the first to speak. Madam President, we cannot let this stand. Those people died because they supported humanity. We have a moral obligation to respond. And what kind of response are you suggesting, Admiral? Asked Secretary of State Robert Kim. The Galactic Council has over 3,000 warships. Earth has 47. The mathematics are quite simple. Mathematics didn't matter to the 300 people we rescued, Sarah said. Every head in the room turned toward her. They didn't expect us to fight the entire Council fleet. They just expected us to care. President Vasquez looked at Sarah with tired eyes. Captain Chun, no one in this room doubts your courage or your commitment, but caring is not enough. We have to think about the consequences of our actions. If we attack Council forces, they could destroy every human colony in the galaxy. And if we do nothing, Sarah replied, they will destroy our allies instead. Either way, innocent people die. The only difference is whether we stand with our friends or abandon them. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some argued for immediate military action against Council targets. Others wanted to try diplomatic solutions, appealing to the more moderate Council species for justice. A few suggested that humanity should withdraw from galactic politics entirely, focusing on protecting Earth and its closest colonies. Sarah listened to it all, but her mind kept returning to something Dr. Cathara had told her during the voyage. Home, the Vorthix scientist had explained that the attack on Kepler station was just the beginning. Operation Clean Slate would continue until every witness to Council crimes was eliminated. They are not just targeting our allies, Sarah had said to the president during a private meeting. They are targeting the truth itself. They want to create a galaxy where no one remembers what they have done, where no one can challenge their version of history. Finally, as the debate showed no signs of ending, a new voice cut through the argument. Dr. Cathara had been invited to address the assembly, speaking through a translation device from the medical facility where the Kepler station survivors were being treated. Honored humans, the Vortex crystalline voice said, I have listened to your discussion and I understand your fear. The Council is indeed powerful and the price of resistance will be high. But I must tell you something that you may not understand. The room fell silent. For thousands of years, the species of this galaxy have lived under Council rule because we believed we had no choice. We were told that the Council brought peace, that their control prevented chaos and war. Most of us accepted this because the alternative seemed worse. Dr. Cathara paused, and the crystals that formed their body pulsed with a sad, dim light. But in the past 3 years since humanity joined the galactic community, something has changed. For the first time, we saw a species that questioned the Council's authority. We saw beings who believed that peace built on fear and oppression was not real peace at all. The alien's voice grew stronger. You showed us that it was possible to stand up for what was right even when the odds were against you. You taught us that sometimes the cost of doing nothing is higher than the cost of fighting. The beings who died at Kepler station died because they learned this lesson from you. Sarah felt tears on her cheeks as Dr. Cathara continued. If humanity abandons us now, the lesson dies with us. But if you stand firm, if you show the galaxy that there is another way, then those deaths will not be meaningless. Others will remember. Others will follow your example. When the Vorthik finished speaking, the room remained silent for a long time. Finally, President Vasquez stood up. Thank you, Dr. Cathara. Your words have given us much to think about. She looked around the room at the faces of Earth's leaders. We will reconvene tomorrow morning for a final vote on our response. But the decision was taken out of their hands 6 hours later. Sarah was in her quarters, trying to get some sleep, when the emergency alarms began to sound throughout the station. She dressed quickly and ran to the command center, where she found chaos. Every communication channel was receiving the same signal. Broadcast on all frequencies across human space. It was Counselor Vexstar, speaking from what appeared to be the bridge of a massive warship. Behind him, Sarah could see the distinctive purple and gold clouds of the Kepler Nebula. But something was different. Where the refugee world of New Ceylani should have been, there was only empty space and glowing debris. People of Earth, Vexstar's voice said, cold and emotionless. You have received reports about the unfortunate incident at Kepler station. I want to ensure that you understand the truth about what happened there. The display changed to show official council footage of the attack, but this version was edited, showing only the final moments when the station's defenses fired on the Zephyrian ships. The terrorist facility known as Kepler Station opened fire on peaceful council vessels. Vexstar continued. This unprovoked attack forced our ships to respond in self-defense. Regrettably, the terrorists chose to fight rather than surrender, resulting in unnecessary casualties. Sarah felt sick as she watched the lies being broadcast across the galaxy. The edited footage made it look like the station had attacked first, that the council ships had been defending themselves. Furthermore, Vexstar said, we have discovered evidence that this terrorist attack was planned and supported by agents of the human government. The corruption has spread further than we initially believed. The image changed again, now showing the orbital bombardment of New Cylani. Sarah watched 200 million people die in seconds as the planet's surface was turned to molten glass. The world of New Cylani has been cleansed of the terrorist infection, Vexstar announced. This action was necessary to prevent the spread of human-inspired violence to other peaceful worlds. Sarah realized she was shaking with rage. The Zephyrian was not just committing genocide. He was broadcasting it live, making sure that every species in the galaxy understood the consequences of opposing council authority. To the humans watching this broadcast, Vexstar continued, I offer one final opportunity for peace. Surrender yourselves to council justice. Accept permanent status as a client species under our protection. Do this and no further action will be necessary. The Zephyrian leaned forward, his black eyes seeming to look directly through the camera. But if you choose to continue supporting terrorism and chaos, if you refuse to accept the council's generous offer, then you will share the fate of your allies. The choice is yours, but you have only 24 hours to decide. The transmission ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence. President Vasquez arrived 10 minutes later, still in her nightclothes but moving with grim determination. Status report, she demanded. Long-range sensors confirm it, Admiral. Torres said quietly. New Cylani is gone. The entire planet has been sterilized. 200 million people, dead. Sarah stared at the tactical display showing the Kepler system. Where New Cylani had been, there was now only a cloud of superheated gas and debris. An entire world wiped from existence in the time it took to drink a cup of coffee. Ma'am, the communications officer reported, we're receiving messages from human colonies throughout the galaxy. They're asking for instructions. Some are already beginning evacuation procedures. President Vasquez closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them with a look of steel that Sarah had never seen before. Cancel the morning vote, she said. I'm calling an emergency session of the United Earth Assembly for 1 hour from now. Every representative, every colony leader, every ship captain, everyone. Admiral Torres looked at her with concern. Madam President, what are you going to tell them? The truth, she replied, that we tried diplomacy. We tried cooperation. We tried to find a peaceful solution. And the answer we received was genocide. 1 hour later, Sarah stood with thousands of other humans in the great assembly hall that had been built in Earth's orbital ring. Representatives appeared on holographic displays from every human settlement, from the lunar cities to the generation ships traveling between stars. For the first time in human history, every human in space was connected to this single moment. President Vasquez stepped up to the podium at the center of the hall. Behind her, the evidence from Kepler Station and New Cylani played on massive screens. The images of murdered children, destroyed homes, and burning worlds created a backdrop that made speech unnecessary, but she spoke anyway. My fellow humans, she began, her voice carrying to every corner of human space. 3 days ago, I stood before you as the president of a species seeking its place among the stars. Today, I stand before you as the leader of a people at war. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. We did not choose this war. We did not want this war. We spent 3 years trying to prove that humanity could be a force for peace in the galaxy. We offered friendship to those who would accept it. We sought justice through law and diplomacy. Her voice grew stronger. But we have learned that there can be no peace with those who see genocide as a tool of policy. There can be no justice from courts that consider mass murder to be self-defense. There can be no diplomacy with beings who offer only submission or death. The president gestured to the images behind her. Our allies trusted us. They believed in our vision of a galaxy where different species could work together as equals. They died because of that trust, murdered by those who call themselves peacekeepers. She paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the assembly. Counselor Vextar has given us an ultimatum: submit to permanent slavery or face destruction. He believes that fear will make us bow down, that the threat of death will break our spirit. President Vasquez looked directly into the cameras that carried her image to every human settlement. He is wrong. Humanity has faced extinction before. We have survived ice ages and plagues, wars and disasters that should have ended our species. We are still here not because we are the strongest or the smartest or the most numerous. We are here because we refuse to surrender what makes us human. Her voice rose to fill the great hall. Today we choose to stand with our friends, living and dead. We choose to fight for a galaxy where genocide is not acceptable, where might does not make right, where species can disagree without facing extermination. The president reached into her jacket and pulled out a document that Sarah recognized as the formal declaration that had been prepared but never used. By the authority granted to me by the United Earth Assembly and the Colonial Council, I hereby declare that a state of war exists between humanity and the Galactic Council. We will fight until our allies are avenged, until the truth is known. Throughout the galaxy, until no species has to live in fear of speaking out against injustice. She looked up from the document, her eyes blazing with determination. To our enemies, we say this: you taught us that fire was the only language you understood. Very well, we are fast learners, and humans have always been good with fire. The great hall erupted in cheers that could be heard across the vacuum of space. On colony worlds throughout human space, people stood in their homes and workplaces, tears streaming down their faces as they realized that their leaders had chosen principle over safety, justice over survival. But Sarah, watching from her position near the back of the hall, felt no joy in this moment. She thought about the 300 survivors from Kepler Station recovering in the medical facilities below. She thought about the billions of humans who would now face the wrath of the most powerful military force in galactic history. War had come to humanity, whether they wanted it or not. The only question now was whether they could win it before everyone they cared about was dead. As the cheering died down, President Vasquez spoke once more, her voice now quiet but carrying clearly through the hall. Admiral Torres, you have your orders. Show them what humans do when someone hurts our friends. In the silence that followed, Sarah could hear the sound of her own heartbeat again. But this time, it was not the nervous flutter of fear. It was the steady, determined rhythm of a warrior preparing for battle. The war had begun. Admiral Marcus Torres stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, humanity's newest and most powerful warship, and watched as the Galactic Council's supply convoy moved through the asteroid field ahead of them. 3 massive cargo ships, protected by only 2 escort vessels. It was exactly the kind of target that Earth's new strategy was designed to exploit. 2 months had passed since President Vasquez declared war on the Galactic Council. 2 months of hit-and-run attacks, sabotage operations, and psychological warfare that had turned the galaxy upside down. The Council had expected humanity to fight like other species they had conquered in the past. Large fleet battles, direct confrontations, honorable defeats that ended with surrender ceremonies. Instead, humanity had done something the Council had never experienced before. They disappeared. "Admiral," reported Captain Chun from her position at the tactical station. Sarah had been promoted after her rescue of the Kepler Station survivors and now served as Torres's chief strategist. "The convoy is maintaining course. No sign they've detected us." Torres nodded. The asteroid field provided perfect cover for human ships, which were smaller and more maneuverable than Council vessels. The enemy's massive dreadnoughts were powerful, but they were also slow and easy to track. Human ships could strike and vanish before the Council even knew they were under attack. "Begin the operation," Torres ordered. Around them, 12 human ships emerged from behind asteroids like ghosts materializing from the darkness. They moved in perfect coordination, each crew trained in the new tactics that Earth's military had developed specifically for this war. The attack lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Human ships swarmed around the convoy like angry wasps, targeting engines and weapon systems with surgical precision. The escort vessels tried to respond, but their heavy weapons were designed for fighting other large ships, not the fast-moving fighters that danced around them. One cargo ship was disabled. The second lost its navigation systems and began spinning helplessly through space. The third tried to run, but human fighters attached magnetic charges to its hull, forcing it to surrender rather than be destroyed. The escort ships fared worse. One was crippled by a coordinated missile attack that left it drifting without power. The other was boarded by human marines who captured it intact, along with all its computer systems and crew. "Mission complete," reported Captain Chun. "All objectives secured. 0 human casualties." It was the 43rd successful operation since the war began. 43 times human forces had struck Council targets and vanished without a trace. Supply convoys, communication stations, military outposts, and patrol ships had all fallen victim to Earth's new way of fighting, but the real victory was not in the ships they captured or the supplies they destroyed. The real victory was in the message they were spreading. Torres activated the communication system and began recording the message that would be broadcast throughout the galaxy within hours. Behind him, the captured Council ships drifted helplessly in space, their crews being transferred to prisoner facilities. "People of the galaxy," Torres began, "you have been told that the attack on Kepler station was necessary to stop terrorism. You have been told that the destruction of New Cylani was justified to prevent rebellion. You have been told that the Galactic Council acts only to preserve peace." The view shifted to show recordings from the captured ship's computers, communication logs, mission orders, and classified files that the Council had never intended for public viewing. "These are the real orders given to Council forces," Torres continued. "Operation Clean Slate, the systematic extermination of every species that has ever opposed Council rule. The murder of civilians, the destruction of entire worlds, the covering up of crimes that span centuries." The evidence was overwhelming. Not just the recent attacks on humanity's allies, but decades of hidden operations against species that had been pacified by the Council. Worlds that had simply vanished from official records. Populations that had been relocated and then eliminated when they became inconvenient. "The Council has told you that resistance is impossible," Torres said. "They have convinced you that their power cannot be challenged. But we are proof that they are wrong. Every ship we capture, every operation we expose, every day we continue to fight shows that the Council is not invincible." The message ended with footage from the boarding operation, showing human marines working alongside alien crew members who had volunteered to join the resistance. Vorthek technicians helping to decrypt Council files. Cylani engineers sabotaging their own ships rather than serve a regime that had murdered their families. Nexari navigators providing intelligence about Council fleet movements. "We are not fighting alone," Torres concluded. "Every species in this galaxy has suffered under Council rule. Together we can build something better." The broadcast was transmitted on every frequency, spread through every communication network, and uploaded to every data storage system the humans could reach. Within hours, it was being viewed on thousands of worlds across the galaxy. The Council's response was swift and brutal. 3 days later, Captain Chun stood in the war room aboard Earth's command station, watching the tactical displays with growing concern. The Council had deployed over 200 ships to hunt for human forces, but that was not the worst news. "They're targeting civilian populations," reported Intelligence Officer Park. Any world that receives our broadcasts, any species that shows signs of unrest, they're hitting with full force. The displays showed the destruction of 5 more worlds in the past week. Not military targets, but refugee camps, civilian colonies, and research stations. The Council was making it clear that anyone who listened to human propaganda would face extinction. "It's working exactly as they planned," said Dr. Cathara, who had become an unofficial advisor to Earth's military leadership. The Vortex crystals pulsed with anger. "They want us to stop broadcasting the truth because we cannot bear to watch innocent people die because of our actions." Torres studied the reports with grim determination. "Then we change tactics again. If they want to play this game, we'll show them how it's really done." The new strategy was called Operation Mirror. Instead of attacking military targets, human forces began striking at the Council's economic infrastructure. Trading stations, banking facilities, corporate headquarters, and luxury resorts where Council elites spent their time. But the real genius of the operation was not in what they destroyed, but in what they preserved. Every attack was recorded from multiple angles. Every conversation with captured Council officials was broadcast live. Every piece of evidence about Council corruption was spread across the galaxy faster than their censors could suppress it. The breakthrough came when human forces captured the Zephyrian luxury liner Eternal Pride, which was carrying Counselor Vexstar himself to a private meeting with corporate leaders. The boarding operation was led by Captain Chun personally. She and her Marines fought their way through the ship's security forces with ruthless efficiency, using tactics learned from months of combat operations. But when they reached Vexstar's private suite, they found something unexpected. The Counselor was not alone. With him were representatives from all 12 Council species, including several who had publicly claimed to oppose the war against humanity. They were planning the next phase of Operation Clean Slate, discussing which species would be eliminated next, and how to hide the evidence from their own populations. "Counselor Vexstar," Captain Chun said as her Marines secured the room, "you're under arrest for crimes against galactic civilization." The Zephyrian looked at her with his black eyes, showing no fear despite being surrounded by armed humans. "You cannot arrest a member of the Galactic Council, Primitive. We are above your laws." "Not anymore," Chun replied. She activated the recording equipment that would broadcast everything live across the galaxy. "You're going to tell everyone exactly what you've been doing. All of it." What followed was 6 hours of the most damaging testimony in galactic history. Faced with evidence from his own computer systems, confronted by survivors of his massacres, and knowing that every word was being broadcast to billions of viewers, Vexstar finally broke. He confessed to ordering the destruction of Kepler Station. He admitted that New Ceylani had been destroyed as a warning to other species. He revealed the full scope of Operation Clean Slate, including plans to eliminate over 300 billion people across 40 different worlds. But the most shocking revelation came when he was asked why the Council had chosen such extreme measures. "Because they gave us no choice," Vexstar said, his voice filled with rage. "For thousands of years we maintained order through fear and respect. Species obeyed because they understood their place in the natural hierarchy. But then the humans came, and they taught others to question our authority." The Counselor looked directly into the camera, his black eyes blazing with hatred. "They showed the galaxy that it was possible to resist, to fight back, to demand equality instead of accepting subjugation. Once that idea spread, we knew that our power would be challenged by every species we had ever conquered. The only solution was to eliminate the source of the contamination." Captain Chun felt a chill as she realized what he was saying. "You're telling us that you committed genocide because we gave other species hope?" "Hope is the enemy of order," Vexstar replied. "Hope leads to rebellion. Rebellion leads to chaos. We chose to preserve civilization by removing the cancer that threatened to destroy it." The broadcast ended there, but its effects rippled across the galaxy like a shock wave. For the first time, every species in galactic space heard a Council leader admit that they had been murdering people not for security reasons, But to maintain their own power, the response was immediate and overwhelming. On Andorian Prime, the local population rose up against their council-appointed governors. On Tau Ceti, the military garrison defected to join the Human Alliance. On dozens of worlds across the galaxy, species that had been silent for centuries finally found their voices. The Council tried to suppress the rebellions with military force. But they faced a problem they had never encountered before. They were fighting on hundreds of fronts simultaneously, against enemies who had learned human tactics and human determination. The turning point came at the Battle of Arcturus, where the Council assembled their largest fleet to crush what they believed was the main human base of operations. Admiral Torres had been expecting this attack for weeks. Intelligence reports showed that over 800 Council ships were converging on the Arcturus system, led by the massive command ship Eternal Dominion. It was meant to be the final battle of the war, where human resistance would be crushed once and for all. Instead, it became the Council's worst nightmare. The human fleet that met them was not alone. Ships from a dozen different species fought. Alongside Earth's forces, many of them commanded by officers who had defected from the Council military. The battle lines were not drawn between humans and aliens, but between those who believed in freedom and those who served tyranny. The fight lasted for 18 hours and covered 3 star systems. Council ships, designed for overwhelming firepower, found themselves outmaneuvered by smaller vessels that fought like a pack of wolves. Human boarding parties, supported by alien allies, captured ship after ship from the inside. The end came when Captain Chun led a desperate assault on the Eternal Dominion itself. Her strike force consisted of humans, Vorthik, Cylani, Nexari, and even some Zephyrians who had turned against their own government. They fought their way through the massive ship's defenses, deck by deck, until they reached the bridge. The ship's captain, a Zephyrian admiral named Krexter, was waiting for them with his personal guard. But when Chen demanded his surrender, something unexpected happened. Half of his own crew turned their weapons on him. "Admiral Krexter," said the ship's Zephyrian first officer, "you are relieved of command. This crew will not participate in genocide." As the Council's command ship surrendered, Admiral Torres broadcast a message from its bridge to every remaining Council vessel in the battle zone. "This is Admiral Torres of the Earth Fleet," he said, standing surrounded by representatives from half a dozen species. "The war is over. You have a choice. Surrender now and help us build a better galaxy, or continue fighting for a cause that your own people have abandoned." One by one, the Council ships powered down their weapons and surrendered. But the real victory was not the destruction of the Council fleet. The real victory was the message it sent to every corner of the galaxy. The Council was not invincible. Resistance was possible. Change could happen. As Captain Chen watched the defeated ships being escorted to temporary prison facilities, she thought about Dr. Catharas' words from months ago. The Vorthak had been right. The galaxy was learning that there was another way to live, another way to organize civilization. The question now was whether they could build something better from the ashes of what they had destroyed. Standing on the bridge of the captured Eternal Dominion, surrounded by aliens who had chosen freedom over fear, Chen allowed herself to hope that the answer was yes. Admiral Marcus Torres stood before the gates of the Galactic Council's capital city on Zephyr Prime, watching as the last defenses of the old order crumbled around him. Smoke rose from dozens of buildings where fires still burned 3 days after the planet's liberation. The great towers that had housed the Council's government for thousands of years now flew the flags of a dozen different species, symbols of the new alliance that had grown from humanity's desperate war. But Torres felt no joy as he watched the end of the Galactic Council. Around him, the city was filled with refugees from across the galaxy. Beings who had lost their homes, their families, their entire worlds in the chaos that followed the Council's collapse. The price of victory had been higher than anyone had. Imagine Captain Sarah Chun approached from the direction of the temporary command center that had been set up in what used to be the Council's main assembly hall. Her uniform was dirty and torn from weeks of fighting, and Torres could see the exhaustion in her eyes. The war had aged all of them far beyond their years. "Admiral," she said quietly, "the tribunal is ready to begin. They're asking for you to give your testimony." Torres nodded, though part of him wanted to walk away from the entire proceedings. The War Crimes Tribunal had been convened to determine responsibility for the destruction that had swept across the galaxy. Not just the Council's crimes, but the consequences of the war that humanity had started in response to those crimes. The numbers were staggering. Over 200 worlds had been damaged or destroyed in the fighting. Billions of people had died, not just in the original massacres, but in the chaos that followed when the Council's authority collapsed. Entire star systems had fallen into civil war as different factions fought for control. "How are the survivors doing?" Torres asked as they walked through the ruined streets. "As well as can be expected," Chung replied. "Dr. Cathara has been working with the relief teams, but there are just so many of them. Every day, more refugee ships arrive with stories of worlds torn apart by fighting." They passed a group of Selani children playing in the rubble of what had once been a government building. Their parents watched nervously from nearby, still afraid despite being told they were safe. These were beings who had never known anything but fear of authority, and learning to trust was going to take time. "The prosecution is going to argue that we're responsible for all of this," Torres said. "That by starting the war, we caused more suffering than we prevented." Chung was quiet for a moment. "Maybe they're right. Maybe there was another way. And maybe if we had done nothing, the Council would have continued murdering species for another 1,000 years, Torres replied. "We'll never know what might have been. We can only deal with what is." The tribunal was being held in the Council's former High Court, a massive chamber with seats for representatives from every known species. But unlike the old Council sessions, where a few powerful races made all the decisions, this gathering included voices that had been silenced for centuries. Torres took his place at the defendant's table, facing a panel of judges from 12 different species. Some of them were former council members who had defected during the war. Others were leaders of species that had been oppressed by the old regime. All of them had lost people in the fighting that followed humanity's declaration of war. The chief judge was an elderly Nexari named Deep Wisdom Flowing, whose own homeworld had been one of the casualties of the chaos. The aquatic being's voice bubbled with controlled emotion as he spoke. "Admiral Torres, you stand accused of initiating a galactic war that resulted in the deaths of over 50 billion sentient beings. How do you plead to these charges?" Torres stood up slowly, feeling the weight of every decision he had made during the war. "Your Honor, I plead not guilty to the charges as stated, but I accept full responsibility for the consequences of my actions." A murmur ran through the chamber at his words. In the gallery, Torres could see representatives from hundreds of species, many of them wearing the black armbands that signified they had lost family members in the fighting. "You accept responsibility but plead not guilty?" asked one of the judges, a reformed Zephyrian who had helped overthrow his own government. "Please explain this contradiction." Torres looked around the chamber, seeing faces that represented every corner of the galaxy. Some looked at him with anger, others with gratitude, and many with the simple exhaustion of beings who had seen too much suffering. "Your Honors, 3 years ago, humanity discovered that the Galactic Council was committing systematic genocide against species that opposed their rule. We had a choice. We could remain silent and allow the murders to continue, or we could speak out and risk the consequences." He gestured toward the gallery, where Dr. Cathara sat with other survivors of the Kepler Station massacre. "When we chose to speak out, our allies were murdered for supporting us. 15,000 people at Kepler Station, 200 million on New Selani. Hundreds of millions more were planned for elimination under Operation Clean Slate." Torres's voice grew stronger as he continued. "We had another choice then? We could submit to permanent slavery under council rule, or we could fight for the right to exist as free beings. We chose to fight, but we never chose the chaos that followed. We never wanted entire star systems to tear themselves apart in civil war. One of the judges, a Vorthek whose crystals pulsed with deep blue light, leaned forward. But you must have known that destroying the Council's authority would lead to instability. Surely you considered the consequences? Of course we did, Torres replied. But what was the alternative? Allow the Council to continue ruling through fear and murder? Accept that genocide was an acceptable tool of government? Submit to a system where speaking out against injustice meant death? He paused, looking directly at each judge in turn. We made a calculation that the short-term pain of change was better than the long-term suffering of continued oppression. Maybe we were wrong. Maybe there was a way to reform the system from within, though thousands of years of history suggest otherwise. But I would rather stand trial for trying to stop genocide than live with the knowledge that I did nothing while innocent people died. The trial continued for weeks, with hundreds of witnesses testifying about the war and its aftermath. Some spoke of the horrors they had witnessed as worlds burned in civil war. Others told stories of liberation, of species finally free to govern themselves after centuries of oppression. The most powerful testimony came from former Council officials who had defected during the war. They revealed the full scope of the Council's crimes, showing that Operation Clean Slate was just the latest in a long history of systematic extermination campaigns. The Council maintained power through what we call demographic management, testified one former Zephyrian administrator. Any species that grew too large, too influential, or too independent was quietly reduced through manufactured disasters, engineered plagues, or outright military action. We convinced ourselves it was necessary for galactic stability. But the prosecution also presented devastating evidence of the war's cost. Refugee camps filled with orphan children, planets stripped of resources by competing warlords, entire species that had simply vanished in the chaos, their final fate unknown. The hardest moment for Torres came when a young Cylani named Growing in Ashes took the stand. Her homeworld had been destroyed not by the Council, but by one of the warlord factions that had emerged after the government collapsed. My family supported the Human Alliance, she said, her leaf-like skin trembling with emotion. We believed in freedom, in the right to choose our own path. But when the fighting came to our world, it didn't matter what we believed. The warlords killed anyone who might challenge them, just like the Council had done before. She looked directly at Torres, her large eyes filled with pain. Admiral, you gave us freedom. But you also gave us the responsibility to use it wisely. Not everyone was ready for that responsibility. How many people had to die while we learned? Torres had no answer for her. It was the question that haunted him every night, the knowledge that every choice he had made had led to someone's death. The trial's climax came when Counselor Vextar was brought from his prison cell to testify. The former Zephyrian leader had aged badly during his captivity, his gray skin now pale and his black eyes sunken with exhaustion. Counselor Vextar, the chief judge said, you have admitted to ordering the deaths of over 400 million people during your time in office. Do you have anything to say in defense of your actions? Vextar looked around the chamber with something that might have been contempt or might have been resignation. One maintained order, he said simply. 3,000 years the Council kept peace in this galaxy. Yes, we used harsh methods. Yes, we made difficult decisions that cost lives, but we prevented the kind of chaos you see today. He gestured toward the chamber's windows, beyond which the sounds of reconstruction work could be heard. Look around. This is what happens when authority collapses. War, suffering, uncertainty. How many billions have died in the past year because the humans destroyed a system that worked? A system that worked for whom? Asked Dr. Cathara, who had been given permission to question the witness. For the species you kept as slaves? For the worlds you strip-mined? For the billions you murdered to maintain your power? Vextar's black eyes fixed on the Vorthak with ancient hatred. It worked for civilization itself. The strong ruled the weak as nature intended. Resources were distributed efficiently. Conflicts were resolved before they could spread. The galaxy was stable. And the cost of that stability? Dr. Cathara pressed. Was acceptable Vexstar replied without hesitation. Better that some should die to preserve order than that all should suffer in chaos. The chamber fell silent as the implications of his words sank in. Even now, facing judgment for his crimes, the former counselor could not see anything wrong with using mass murder as a tool of government. After 6 weeks of testimony, the tribunal reached its verdict. Admiral Torres was found guilty of initiating an unauthorized war, but the judges ruled that his actions had been justified by the extreme circumstances. He was sentenced to community service, working with refugee resettlement programs for the next 5 years. More importantly, the tribunal issued a comprehensive report on the council's crimes and the war that followed. The document, which became known as the Zafra Accords, established new principles for galactic governance based on consent rather than force. 2 years later, Captain Sarah Chun stood before the first session of the Reformed Galactic Assembly, wearing the uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps rather than her military dress. She had been chosen as humanity's first ambassador to the new government, a role that required her to help build the kind of galaxy they had fought to create. The assembly hall was very different from the old council chambers. Instead of a few dominant species making decisions for everyone else, hundreds of representatives sat in a great circle, each with an equal voice in the proceedings. The Vorthek delegate sat next to a reformed Zephyrian. The Cylani representative shared information with a Nexari scientist. Species that had been enemies for centuries were learning to work together. But the scars of the war were still visible everywhere. Empty seats where representatives from destroyed worlds should have sat. Memorial walls listing the names of species that had vanished in the chaos. Refugee camps on dozens of worlds where survivors were still trying to rebuild their lives. Fellow beings, Chun said, as she addressed the assembly for the first time, we gather today in the shadow of great tragedy and the hope of great possibility. The war that brought us together cost us more than we ever imagined, but it also taught us that change is possible, that tyranny can be defeated, that different species can unite for a common cause. She looked around the chamber, seeing faces that represented every corner of the galaxy. We cannot undo the past. We cannot bring back the dead or rebuild the worlds that were lost. But we can choose what kind of future we build together. We can choose whether the sacrifices made during the war will lead to something better, or whether we will repeat the mistakes that led to so much suffering. Chun paused, thinking of all the people who had died to make this moment possible. The researchers at Kepler Station, the refugees on New Cylani, the soldiers who had fought in the Battle of Arcturus, the civilians caught in the chaos that followed. Humanity did not come to the stars to rule or to be ruled. We came to find our place among equals. If we had to tear down an empire of tyrants to achieve that goal, then we accept the responsibility that comes with that choice. The question now is not whether we were right to fight, but whether we can prove worthy of the peace we have won. The speech was broadcast across the galaxy, reaching refugee camps and reconstruction sites, military bases and civilian settlements. On Earth, people gathered in public squares to watch their former military captain speak for all of humanity. But the most important audience was in the assembly hall itself, where representatives from hundreds of species listened to a human explain why the war had been necessary and what they hoped to build from its ashes. When Chen finished speaking, the hall erupted in applause that lasted for nearly 10 minutes. It was not just approval for her words, but recognition that something new was beginning. A galaxy where species could disagree without facing extinction. Where the strong protected the weak rather than exploiting them. Where peace was built on justice rather than fear. Admiral Torres, watching from the gallery, felt tears on his cheeks as he realized that the price they had paid might finally be worth it. The galaxy was burning when the war began, corrupted by centuries of oppression and injustice. Now, from those ashes, something better was growing. It would take generations to heal all the wounds. Some species would never recover from what they had lost. The scars would remain forever, reminders of the cost of fighting tyranny. But for the first time in galactic history, every being had a voice. Every species had a choice. Every world had the right to determine its own future. It was not the ending anyone had wanted when the war began, but it was the ending they had earned, and perhaps that was enough.